Hi everyone! Today we're going to explore a story that proves size doesn't equal strength, and sometimes the most powerful voice can come from the smallest place. You'll never believe it, but a nearly invisible village in Burkina Faso, unlisted on maps and ignored by ministries, quietly shaped the way the future could look for all of us. And it all started with a single question from a child. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And comment below with your location and local time. I want to know where you're watching from. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started tonight. The sun in Burkina Faso doesn't rise, it emerges. Slow, deliberate, stretching shadows across clay rooftops and cracked earth until the day breathes fully awake. On one of those mornings, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of a small village, one he hadn't planned to visit, one that hadn't appeared on the itinerary. No flags flew here, no signs welcomed you. The only marker was a tree, bent sideways by wind and time, at the fork in a dusty road. He was led there by a local schoolteacher named Amadou, who simply said, "You need to see this." The village had no clinic, no electricity, one well, a tiny schoolhouse made from pressed mud and wood. And inside that school, about 20 children sat on mats, eyes wide, hands dusty with chalk. Ibrahim entered without ceremony. The teacher introduced him quietly and class resumed. No grand speech, no staged photos, just observation. Then came the question. A girl no older than 10, with braids wrapped in red thread, raised her hand and asked, "If the president can come here, does that mean we finally matter?" The room paused. Even the teacher froze. Ibrahim didn't answer right away, because he understood in that moment the gravity of her words. Not as flattery, but as challenge. He knelt beside her, looked her in the eye, and simply said, "Only if we build something together that lasts." That answer stayed in the air like incense, soft but unforgettable. He spent the rest of the day walking through the village, listening to elders who remembered colonization, to mothers who wanted nothing more than a steady water supply, to children who dreamed of becoming nurses, pilots, teachers, if only they could keep learning past primary school. There were no petitions, no demands, just needs, clear, human, humble. That night, Ibrahim sat under the tree by the road, notebook open on his lap. He didn't write plans. He wrote names, faces, phrases he didn't want to forget. Before leaving, the children gave him a small stack of hand-drawn letters, pictures mostly. But one stood out. A child had drawn a picture of a house made of books, with stick figures smiling inside. At the top, in shaky handwriting, "Our voice is small, but it is real." And that, more than any election or meeting, changed something in him. Because leadership, he realized, wasn't about how loud your voice was. It was about how deeply you could hear the quiet ones. Weeks passed, and the heat in Dallas was thick with summer. Jasmine Crockett sat at her desk in her local office, flipping through routine correspondence when a plain brown envelope, slightly wrinkled and hand-addressed, caught her attention. No postage stamp, just a label that read, "Hand delivered." Inside, folded with the care of someone who believed in their words, was the letter. It wasn't typed, it wasn't formal. Just a few pages of notebook paper filled with blocky handwriting and drawings, some scribbled, some carefully traced. And clipped to the corner was a photo. Children standing outside a schoolhouse made of clay and branches. In the center, one child held up a sign written in French and translated at the bottom. "We are ready to speak if someone will hear." It was signed by Amadou, the teacher from the village Ibrahim had visited. And it wasn't asking for money. It wasn't asking for rescue. It was inviting her. Not physically, though she'd later go, but emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. It was a call to step outside of her world and into theirs. Jasmine sat with the letter for a long time. She read it twice, then 3 more times. Something in its honesty, its lack of polish, its absence of politics, unlocked something in her. It reminded her of her own childhood in a part of Dallas where mailboxes stayed empty, but hearts stayed full. So she didn't call a press conference. She didn't issue a statement. She wrote back. Her reply was short, just 1 page. She didn't have the right words yet, but she had a promise. I hear you. I want to learn. Tell me what you need, on your terms. She sent it through a contact who worked in West Africa with a small package, solar-powered recorders, blank journals and crayons. But more importantly, she sent trust. In the weeks that followed, Amadou sent updates, voice messages from children, drawings of their ideas, a library under the tree, a garden where elders could teach, a mural of dreams on the school wall. None of it was about money. It was about voice. And Jasmine realized that something rare was happening. This wasn't aid. This was alignment. She began bringing those voices into her work, not as symbols, but as guides. In staff meetings, she played snippets of the children's voices. In community forums, she passed around copies of their drawings. This, she told her team, is what partnership looks like, not policy, presence. Her colleagues were skeptical at first. Why pour energy into a place half a world away? But Jasmine understood something they didn't yet. The future wasn't about big platforms anymore. It was about the places no one looked at, the voices no one bet on, the tiny notes passed under the door of the world, asking softly, "Can you hear me now?" And so she kept listening, because when a village whispers, it's not for attention, it's for connection. And when you answer that whisper with your whole heart, you don't just hear a voice, you amplify a future. The village had no blueprints, no strategic 5-year plan, no architectural renderings of schools or clinics. What it had was people, stories, memory, and a hunger to be seen. That's what Jasmine and Ibrahim honored above all else. They didn't tell the village what to build. They asked, "What do you see here when you close your eyes?" Amadou held the first meeting under the bent tree, the one Ibrahim had sat under months earlier. People brought mats, buckets to sit on, babies in slings. And when asked what they wanted, no one spoke of airports or stadiums. They said, "We want a roof that doesn't fall during storms. We want girls to stay in school after their first moon. We want to plant things that grow even after we're gone." Jasmine, thousands of miles away, received the audio of that meeting. She played it through a Bluetooth speaker in her kitchen at 2 a.m., eyes closed, heart wide open, and something inside her clicked. She didn't need to bring anything to the village. She needed to follow. So she built a bridge, not of concrete, but of people. She connected architects who specialized in sustainable design with artisans in the village. She facilitated calls where elders explained how their ancestors built cooling systems from clay and water, and the professionals, grateful, not arrogant, took notes. Ibrahim, on his side, quietly shifted national priorities. He routed a small, unannounced portion of infrastructure funds toward what he labeled voice-led development. His staff didn't fully understand at first, until they visited and saw a school painted with handprints, a chalkboard built from recycled tin and framed in carved wood, a library made from mud bricks and lined with mats where kids lay belly down to read. No grand opening, just a beginning. And everything, every wall, every lesson plan was shaped by the villagers. One elder said, "We have been led too long by people who do not know our footsteps." So now they walked their own paths. Children became leaders. They formed a storytelling group called Future Ears. Once a week, they interviewed someone in the village and recorded their story on solar devices Jasmine had sent. Those stories traveled back to Dallas, where they were transcribed, translated, and turned into a community newsletter titled The Small Voices Report. Each edition featured wisdom from a village no one had ever heard of, and yet, somehow, everyone needed to hear from. And this wasn't charity. This was reciprocity. One Dallas school adopted the village as their sister community, not to send supplies, but to exchange ideas. Kids in both places asked each other, "What do you see when you dream?" A fifth grader in Dallas wrote, "I dream of walking without fear." A 9-year-old in Burkina Faso replied, "I dream of planting a mango tree and seeing it fruit before I'm grown." It was pure, unfiltered, and it redefined what progress could look like. No longer skyscrapers and policy, but relationships, trust, and a future not built for the people, but with them. Then came the storm. The sky over the village darkened without warning. Winds howled like the ancestors themselves were crying, and the rain didn't fall. It slammed. Walls shook, roofs peeled. The new school, just opened, stood tall for as long as it could, but mud, even when strong, yields to water when the clouds don't stop. By morning, one classroom had collapsed. The garden was submerged. Goats, chickens, gone. A sense of loss hung heavier than the clouds that lingered long after the rain had passed. No one died, but something else had been wounded. Not hope, but rhythm. Jasmine got the news by message, her translator's voice cracking with static and emotion. She sat in her car outside a community meeting, her phone pressed to her ear, not speaking, just listening. And for the first time since it all began, she felt fear. That maybe this wasn't enough. That maybe the village had trusted too much. That maybe truth, connection, and vision weren't strong enough to fight floods. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim got the same call. He listened as Amadou described the scene: mud everywhere, children sleeping under tarps, elders cooking what little they had over wet fires. And then Amadou said something that stopped him cold. The children asked if you would still believe in them now. That line, it gutted him. Because what the storm tested wasn't just walls. It tested whether they'd truly been heard. So neither Jasmine nor Ibrahim rushed in with grand solutions. Instead, they waited. And what happened next silenced every doubt. The villagers didn't wait for rescue. They started to rebuild together. The storytelling kids became messengers, recording needs and updates. They passed the devices to traveling merchants who dropped them at the capital, where volunteers turned them into supply requests: clay for bricks, wood for scaffolding, seeds for a new garden. The elders led the design. The young carried the mud. The women organized food rotations and care groups. The men reshaped the roofs, this time reinforced with bamboo binding and layers of community advice, and this time no blueprint came from outside. Jasmine and Ibrahim watched from afar, not as leaders, but as students. They sent what was needed, quietly: funds for materials, blankets, battery packs, but no orders, no programs, no headlines. And within weeks, the school rose again, stronger, not because it was taller, but because this time it was wholly theirs. That's when Jasmine said something in passing to her team that stayed with them. If your work disappears when you're not there, it was never the people's work, it was yours. And Ibrahim, during a midnight walk through his compound, wrote a note on scrap paper and tucked it into his journal. The future is not what we build, it's what survives after we leave. The storm tested everything, and the village passed, not with flying colors, but with muddy hands, with faith that held, even when the sky didn't. Time passed, and seasons changed, but the village, once unnamed, once invisible, began to glow in the collective memory of people far beyond Burkina Faso. It started quietly. A regional official stopped by one afternoon, unannounced. He had heard stories of a school rebuilt without waiting, of students who ran their own radio station, of murals that changed every month based on the children's dreams. He stayed for hours, sitting beneath the tree where it all began. When he left, he carried no report. Just a memory of something real. Word spread. Development agencies visited next, not with clipboards but with notebooks. Curious, for once, not controlling. They met elders who explained how they tracked storm patterns through bird migration, teachers who wove folk tales into math lessons, children who asked questions sharper than any consultant's theory. "What makes us strong," one boy said, "is that no one thinks for us but us." Then came the journalists, but this time the villagers chose who to speak. They told their story their way, no victim narratives, no savior gloss, just truth. And truth, told well, travels far. In South Africa, a township school adopted the village's model for youth radio. In Kentucky, a grassroots movement started after someone read the Small Voices report. A mayor in Colombia called it the most human blueprint I've seen in years. And through it all, Jasmine and Ibrahim stayed back. They watched the world learn from something they never branded, never owned, just supported, then stepped away from, like parents trusting a child to walk. But the village never forgot. Each year they held a gathering beneath the tree. They called it the Listening Festival. People shared what they had learned, what they still hoped to build, and whose voice they had elevated in the past year. There were no awards. Only candles lit for each story told. One year, Jasmine returned, not to speak, but to listen. She sat at the back, her journal open, a quiet smile on her face. One child, now a teenager, came up and handed her a drawing. It was the village. But this time it had roads, gardens, new homes. In the center, the tree. And beside it, two small figures drawn in pencil. She looked at him. "You remembered us?" He grinned. "No, we grew from you." And just like that, it was clear. This wasn't a story about what was given, it was about what was trusted, what was nurtured, what was believed in before the world even looked. Because when you honor a voice, not for its volume, but for its value, when you hold space instead of holding power, you don't just change one place, you change the map. This story began with a village no one visited and a voice almost no one heard. It could have ended there, just another forgotten dot in the dust of a map. But something unexpected happened. The president of a nation, Ibrahim Traoré, listened to a child. And a congresswoman across an ocean, Jasmine Crockett, responded not with power, but with humility. They didn't come to lead, they came to learn. And by doing so, they sparked something bigger than any of them, a future shaped not by policies or programs, but by people who finally saw themselves as the authors of their own story. The village didn't rise because someone came to save it. It rose because it remembered its own voice, and because someone powerful believed that voice mattered. And that's the truth buried at the heart of this entire journey. When leaders trust people more than they trust systems, transformation begins, not instantly, not perfectly, but deeply. This wasn't a tale of miracles, it was a tale of mud, memory, and mutual respect, of roofs patched by community hands, of drawings turned into dreams, of storms endured, not escaped. And in the end, the most lasting legacy wasn't a building, or a program, or even a festival. It was a mindset that people, when heard, seen, and trusted, build futures no expert could have imagined. So here's your reflection. What voices in your life have been whispering from the background? What small place in your heart or your world have you ignored because it didn't seem important enough? What future could be growing there if only you'd listen? Share your thoughts in the comments. Share a place, a person, or a quiet truth that changed you. Let others read your words and carry them forward. And if this story meant something to you, please subscribe. Help us keep finding and sharing the voices that matter most.